This is the Dallas Morning News.
The presenting sponsor for the Intersections podcast is Lynn, Pinker, Hurst, and Schwegman. Built on a culture of winning, these trial lawyers have proven experience, elite preparation, and relentless focus in the areas of commercial, intellectual property, and employment litigation. Visit Lynn LLP to learn more. And thank you so much to the Lynn, Pinker, Hurst, and Schwegman Group for all you're doing to support the Intersections podcast. This episode is brought to you in partnership by Clay Cooley Automotive, family-owned, family-operated automotive company serving the local DFW Metroplex for over 22 years. Clay, thank you for all you're doing to make Intersections possible.
Kyle, sequels are usually disappointing, but this was the first time that we had a repeat guest, and I'll tell you, it met all my expectations and more.
Yeah, we had a fun time with Rob Kaplan, so Vice Chairman of Goldman Sachs. This is a heavy economic episode, but we touched a lot of topics from energy to the war in Iran to a lot of other things.
And a lot of societal issues. We talked about the inequality, the K-shaped economy, some of the implications, again, not only from an economic standpoint, but from a societal standpoint. Rob, to me, is a fascinating person, enormous intellect, and this was an hour that I got a lot out of.
Yeah, great listen. Tune in. Welcome to Intersections. We take a multi-generational look at the critical issues facing America. Tom, introduce our guest.
This is a first. This is a repeat. So back by popular demand, Rob Kaplan joined us. Rob is the vice chairman of a small firm called Goldman Sachs that you might see in the paper every once in a while. Former president of the Dallas Fed and was a professor at Harvard Business School. Great conversation last time. It's going to be the same this time. Let me start you out though, Rob. You are ensconced in the community now, in Dallas community. You have lived all over the world, and you can live all over the world, clearly with Goldman. But since you came here as president of the Federal Reserve Dallas, you've made this home, and not only made it home, you've got two sons in school here. You're involved in any number of local community efforts. Why did you select Dallas as your home?
I thought it was a great place for my kids to grow up, for my boys. I love the school, but I love the schools in the neighborhood. But the other thing I like about Dallas and Texas generally is there's a feeling of we, not us versus them. So what's an example? You were former mayor. We all know the mayors. We know the governor. We know the mayors in different cities of Houston, San Antonio, Austin. And there's a partnership between the government, business, nonprofits, academia, because in the world we're in, many of the problems we're facing require collaboration. And so what I've noticed about Texas and Dallas specifically is there's that collaboration. So it's our problems. If there's a problem in the community, it's our problem. It's not their problem. And it's our job to step up as business people and try to help solve it. And I think that's a good model for the rest of the country. Not every city in the country is following that model, but it is a good model. The other thing about Texas is a very welcoming place. Many of us, a lot of my friends here are not from here. Many of the CEOs I know, came from somewhere else. And that's a classic Texas story, and that this place welcomes people from outside and makes them feel like they're part of the community very quickly.
And I've talked about it before, but I think in part too, this place is dependent on people. We don't have a lot to fall back on from a geographic or topographical standpoint. There's not a reason for Dallas other than the people came and have built it up and created their own topographic or geographic, like DFW Airport and those sorts of things, which have really put us on the map.
Right. So see, and you get that feel, I would say my first month here, you can, thank you for being here. We're glad you came here. Thank you for your service. We're glad you're part of the community. And people here shouldn't take that for granted. That's distinctive and has helped make Dallas specifically and Texas generally, very successful, and explains why people feel comfortable moving here, moving their business here.
So,
we've gotten to the point. 40 years ago, we were the 12th largest market. We'll be the third largest market in the next couple of years. I use the analogy, maybe not analogy is the right word, but Dallas has really become kind of the center of the U.S. economy. Again, you look at it from a global standpoint. Is that a fair measure?
It is. It's got a number of fantastic features. It's centrally located. We now have a substantial number of Fortune 100, 500 size
24,
companies.
So 1 out of 20 Fortune 500 companies.
It is. It's a model for many terrific things. It's also got some challenges, which is also indicative probably of the country. We have too many kids growing up in poverty in Dallas. Public schools, early childhood literacy needs to be improved. Skills training, we're doing a good job in Dallas Community College, but it needs to be expanded. There's always an issue of infrastructure, water, all those issues in the city and the state. So it's indicative of the country also, and the way we solve those problems might also be a good model for the rest of the country.
And some of those infrastructure, transportation, water, et cetera, those sorts of things all come from the growth, all of the good things that have brought people and businesses here.
They do. The part that worries me that we've made progress, but we have to continue to make more progress. But again, this is a good example. There's many business leaders or former business leaders who are stepping up on this, is we have to improve early childhood literacy, poverty, and that's critical to the future of the city and the state, but it's also critical to the future of the country.
Yeah. Do you see any one aspect economically, so outside of the education and literacy side, do you see any one or two factors economically that would really hurt the city moving forward in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, so there's an issue which we've talked a lot about, as you know, South Dallas. There's an issue where Dallas City proper is not growing as fast as you'd like, and a lot of the growth has been outside in the outskirts, in the developing communities. And so I think there's still a big challenge for Dallas, the city of, to find out a way to redevelop South Dallas, address the, again, poverty issue, improve schools, improve the plight of the at-risk population. I think that's a big challenge for the city.
Well, it's been a year since you were here. We talked a whole host of different things, from administration to the administration policies on the economic side, talking about the strength of the economy. We talked about education, a whole host of things. Gosh, in the last year, it just seems like nothing's happened. So you kind of wonder why we're back visiting again. But if you think about the last year, what jumps out at you from a national economic and public policy standpoint?
So there's been 4 or 5 big developments. That's a lot. I think when I talked with you last, it was unclear how tariffs were going to unfold.
Correct.
So tariffs have now unfolded. I probably said to you a year ago, if I was here, that was likely we were going to make a comprehensive deal with Mexico and Canada, because I said to you then, logistics and supply chains were so critical between Canada, United States, and Mexico. Hasn't happened. Still sand in the gears. So that's a surprise. I probably also, second big development, we talked about the fact we don't have labor force growth in the United States. This is a global problem, not just U.S. Germany is shrinking, Japan is shrinking. But I probably didn't anticipate that we would be as aggressive in the deportations on people that were here legally, but on provisional status. And we're hearing from employers, some number of those workers are not showing up. And we're hearing every day a lot of open jobs in the United States for well-paying jobs, window installers, technicians, electricians, registered nurses. So those are 2 challenges.
And the administration just announced that for green cards, you can't apply within the United States. You got to apply from outside.
So it'll create another complication. So we don't have any labor force growth. With that, we're historically highly leveraged at the government level. So ideally, you want labor force growth to help deleverage, and that leaves it all in the hands of productivity growth if you're going to deleverage. So we've had a huge development in the last year on AI infrastructure, and we're at the early stages of adoption. We've had a big tax bill, I think, since we spoke, the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, which is improving GDP growth in 2026, tax on tips, tax on overtime, accelerated depreciation. The problem is that those incentives will tail off at the end of the year. And then again, the other big thing is we've got $800 billion plus or minus estimated of infrastructure spending just to create compute in a $30 trillion economy, very stimulative. And then last, if that wasn't enough, you got the war. And the war has probably offset to some extent the tax incentives. So if we thought GDP growth this year at my firm was going to be 2.5 real, it's going to be closer to 2, and in the second half of the year, we don't know. It might be below 2, so that's a negative. And then I had been hopeful that we'd start to see some improvement in inflation later this year because of AI adoption, Chinese manufacturing overcapacity, and the war has at a minimum delayed any consideration in the central banks of cutting. And in fact, the opposite, their next move may be up, not down, but we don't know yet. And the treasury curve, so if you're a business person, you're in real estate or you borrow, it means the rate curve is stickier. It hurts business, but back to the government. With the government historically highly leveraged, means debt service for the government is higher than it would have been and what I thought it might have been when we talked a year ago.
Okay, that's a great agenda for our discussion today. But I want to go back a little bit to something that I think in a lot of ways permeates everything you just said. You are a strong leader, have been in the public sector and in the private sector.
Try.
You also were an academic in the sense of teaching leadership at the Harvard Business School. So let's step back and look broadly. If we see institutions across the board in the United States today, there is only one institution that has a confidence rating above 50%. Everything else, Congress, courts, the administration, across the board, below 50%. Given institutions are dependent on having trust, what does that say about leadership in this country? Well,
it says to me that there's a great opportunity for all of us as leaders to step up. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're relying on they to fix something, I think about what you can do. And yeah, we're going through a particularly difficult period where the trust in our institutions and various types is lower, but there's an enormous opportunity, and we have a lot of them in this country, for opportunity for leaders, people, to say, I'm going to take ownership and work with local authorities or national authorities on an issue, and I'm going to try to make it better. I might fail, but I'm going to try. I think the country, we have millions of people, and I think lots of people in this country who do that. And again, in a world where the government is historically highly leveraged and gets better, low, moderate income workers, which there are 85 million of them making below 55 grand a year, are suffocating. They're struggling to make ends meet. I think there's enormous need for all of us to say, we're going to take our time, effort, money, maybe help from our business to try to address these common issues.
That's outside the Beltway, and it's important. There's no question about that. But inside the Beltway, the policies that we have to react to, that become part of our country and set the agenda in a lot of ways. Ben Sass, very interesting individual, tough challenge. He made a comment just recently. It was a fascinating one. He said, people in Congress, they're not interested in solving problems. All they want to do is make TikTok videos. Talk about leadership inside the Beltway, in Congress and then also in the administration. Are we getting the leadership that we need? Are they interested in solving problems? Can we even deal with the big problems, Rob?
So this is why the one party may be unpopular, but the other party is
less popular,
is not any better. And I'm sure it's frustrating to people who are serving in the government, because I know a lot of them, and there's a lot of good people there. But we are, it used to be, and it has been historically, that people around the world wanted to invest in the U.S. because it was most predictable, magnet for talent, great higher education system. They didn't expect the government to be perfect, but they had a good sense of being able to predict what decisions it would make, and they tended to be pro-democracy. They tended to be mitigator of tail risk, extreme events. They were trying to manage it, risk management. And we're in a period right now where we've become very unpredictable. And also we're more polarized politically. This has been going on for decades now, not just years, and redistricting probably eccentric. You want to get the nomination on either side, you have to be more extreme. But governing is about, as you know well, is about coming together and making compromise in the middle. And I'd say we're struggling with that. Now, doesn't mean the problems in the country can't get solved, but there's some only the government can do. Foreign policy, military, safety net. I think there's more that businesses and individuals can do, but it's sure, and there's some that can be done by the state and local government. But what we're seeing right now is we're spent the last couple of years reacting to a number of developments. The world is reacting, and I think leaders in the government on both sides, they all probably struggling with that.
So tactically, if you're a small business leader or even a mid-sized business leader, politics is local. What are the few things that you can go get involved in your neighborhood, your community, your county, et cetera, that can push this conversation forward instead of just looking back, holding up your hand?
So I'm a big fan. The way you run your business has a positive. Employing people is a fantastic public good. Taking care of your employees, trying to develop them, making sure they're thriving. I think that's a great thing. And then in addition, I do think that, and I say this to people at my own firm, pick a cause or two that you personally have a passion for and fits the needs of the city or the state you live in or of the country, whether it's disease-related, poverty-related, childhood literacy, you name it, and get involved. Pick one or two. And by the way, encourage your people to get involved. And I think that's a good model. And I think I've also found the better the business and the more you attract great talent. Great talent wants meaning matters. I taught at Harvard Business School for 10 years. I find that this generation cares more about, they want to do well, but they care about meaning. And they want to think like owners, not just of the business, but of the community. And so I think I think that's a good approach for business leaders.
You alluded to your firm, Goldman Sachs. Let's talk for just a second. What's happening with Goldman Sachs relative to Dallas? You're bringing in up to 10,000 jobs over the course of the next several years?
It won't be that many. We'll probably get to, I think we're saying publicly 5,500 or so. Yep. And we're close to being there already. We're going to have a new building, and we're going to need the new building because we're a little bit sprawled over different parts of downtown. So let's step back. Goldman Sachs is a global firm. And we have really built out our global footprint. When I grew up in the firm, long time ago, 40 plus years ago, we were primarily a United States firm with a headquarters in New York, and the bulk of our people were in New York. Now we have, let's say, 45,000 people globally. 9,000 of them, let's say, plus or minus, are in New York. I just mentioned to you 5,500, let's say, we're already close to having and we'll have in Dallas. And so we're much more geographically sprawled in Europe, in Asia, throughout the United States, although Dallas will be the second largest location. But our job and the job of most of the people living in Dallas, to some extent, is to serve people in the Southwest and Texas. But a lot of what we're doing, and I'm working on myself, is I'm just as likely to be in LA, San Francisco, Europe, Asia. I was just in Mexico last week. We serve our clients globally, but we've spread out our hubs. And so we've done that here for lots of reasons. I'll mention welcoming business community, We think it's a vibrant state. It's going to grow more, central location, pro-business context, and but we use it as a base to serve our clients globally.
Mm-hmm.
Same way we do New York.
Some of those things, though, that you talked about as benefits of Dallas, most people wouldn't say about New York. Business friendly, good cost of living, good cost of doing business, et cetera, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Over time, do you see more of a move out of New York to a Dallas or other places in the world?
So, and I can say this because I lived in New York, I forget already, for 20 plus years. I lived in Boston too. I grew up in Kansas City, so I know different. I'd say there's a lot of great attributes and always will be about New York City. It's a melting pot. It's a magnet. It has been a magnet for talent from around the world. I think I could give it. The new mayor. I'll put it this way. My advice would be, and I think he'll increasingly do this, is again create the partnership. New York City runs a big budget deficit, but it's got a lot of issues. We have a lot of issues here. I would say a lot of those issues can be helped by big foundations headquartered in New York, big businesses that have big presences in New York, business leaders who want to help, and their people want to help. And I think to the extent that New York City and its leadership involves them and makes this, again, a we, not a vilifying one party or another, I think they'll do better.
But that's not the road that we're going down in New York right now. I think of the video talking about a new second home wealth tax was in front of one of the individuals ideally you would love to keep in New York, who's making big investments, et cetera, and alienated that individual. With the new wealth taxes, with the increase of taxes that he has hoped to have on property, et cetera, those sorts of things, and the real move away from business, really condemning business in a lot of different ways.
So I would say I'm in New York all the time. I have an apartment in New York, by the way, and I'm going to probably pay the
wealth tax.
I actually think there's still a very capitalist. People, when I first moved down here, people used to say to me, why isn't New York, people there more pro-capitalist? And I said, my Lord, you have no idea. You want to see capitalism? Go to New York City. Trust me, capitalism is alive and well in New York City. It's not turning against it. This is a hotbed of business development, capitalism. I would actually, I'll gladly, if I pay a tax on my home there, I'm glad to do it. The part that I'd be cautious about, and you mentioned it, is you want to do it in a constructive way, not in a way that vilifies or targets and alienates the business community, because you need that partnership. The problems of workers and the future of workers depends on a vibrant business community. And so I'm more optimistic about New York and New York City. I might have some suggestions for some things they might do a little bit differently. But I think my guess is 25, 50 years from now, New York City will still be a hotbed of business capitalism. But other hubs throughout the United States are competing with them. And I think that's a healthy thing too.
While we're on that topic, though, let's go beyond New York. We touched on some of the new taxes that are coming in, the wealth taxes. Washington's coming in with a new one. You're seeing it.
State of Washington.
Other places on the East Coast. Your thoughts, and I guess part of it's driven by, and we'll talk about the federal deficit, which you touched on a moment ago, but now we're seeing enormous deficits at the state level.
Yes.
And
City
a
level
desire
too.
on a lot of programs from the left to increase the spending at the state level. So to pay for that, they're going to a lot of different types of taxes. Does this bifurcate the country even more towards kind of a pro-business, anti-business?
Yeah, and I would say, and I'm probably in a good position to comment on it, having spent a lot of time in New York City and lived there. It's probably not so black and white that one is pro and one is con. It's they're dealing with problems in different ways, and And I would say the following. So in New York City, they don't have a wealth tax, but they do have this apartment tax. In the state of Washington, as you said, they're actively considering a wealth tax.
Massachusetts is on the line, several other places.
And so what I think you're seeing, and Texas is very fortunate. One of the things we have going for us, we have migration of people and firms of the state.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing we have enormous oil and gas industry, which generates tax revenue that has allowed the state to build a very sizable, multi-billion-dollar rainy day fund. And so I don't take that for granted. But I think what you're seeing is there is an increasing gap between income inequality, wealth inequality, where wealthy people who have financial assets are active consumers. This recent inflation of the last 4 or 5 years has been a challenge, but not as much because they have financial assets that have appreciated.
Yep.
Got to remember, half the workforce in this country, a meaningful percentage of people, do not have any financial assets. They live paycheck to paycheck.
Exactly.
And this inflation the last 4 or 5 years has made it harder for them to make ends meet. And I do think what you're seeing around the country is different jurisdictions finding different ways to try to deal with deficits, the fact that they're losing population. Texas is growing. Florida is growing. But there's not a long list of states that are getting population. We don't have any workforce growth in the United States. And so that's putting strain on 40-plus states. And they're trying to deal with it in different ways. The challenge will be, how do you deal with it in a way that doesn't push more people away and continues to attract people? Yeah. But I'm sympathetic to the challenges these different states and cities are facing. I might deal with them in a different way, but I think it's indicative of an underlying problem that isn't going away, and I'm sympathetic to.
Between taxes, the unpredictable nature of markets, legislation changes, and so many other variables, your financial plan may feel like it is often under attack. That's why your financial planning team should operate like a battleship where everyone is working hard to accomplish the ship's mission. Too many wealth management teams operate like a cruise ship, catering to the masses, chasing fads, and not truly setting their sights on the long-term destination. Do you want confidence that your current financial plan is a battleship that is going to get you long-term results? Reach out to Caleb Williams and his team at Roundtable Associates. They offer wealth management solutions and fiduciary advice with a clear and straightforward fee structure. Roundtable Associates, plan purposely, live abundantly. Thank you, Caleb Williams and team, for everything you're doing to support the Intersections podcast.
You mentioned the growth that we've had. 70% in round numbers of all of the population growth has moved to Texas over the last 5-6 years. So we're
getting more than our fair share.
We've gotten that. And in some part, the reason we've gotten companies and people moving here is because of those policies on the two coasts. Do these additional taxes, additional approaches, do they push it even more with people leaving those areas and coming to areas like the Texases, like the Floridas?
So let's state it more constructively. I think if we had some workforce growth in the United States through controlled, tough immigration, where we maybe got back to 1.5 million workers a year, I think that would help. That would help the country generally. Right now, the water level, when you've got basically very little workforce growth, it intensifies the competition. One of the things that's appealed to people and caused them to move to Texas, we just say, we don't have a state income tax. Many states don't have that. They just couldn't do that. We have a higher property tax, and we have this rainy day fund that's fueled heavily by oil and gas revenue. A lot of states just don't have that option. So yeah, is it creating more tension where people in either East Coast, West Coast, other states are taking a harder look at Florida, Texas, Florida also doesn't have a state income tax. Yeah, I would guess these issues are creating more strain. And so I used to call it the war between the states. I would guess the war between the states is intensifying. But I think for the whole country, GDP growth, you've heard me say this many times, is growth in the workforce, growth in productivity. And the third way, which we've exhausted, is you could leverage up. But we've run out of gas on that one. And so if you don't have workforce growth, everything has to come from productivity growth. We need more workforce growth.
Okay, so let's talk about it. How would you do it? What would be the tactics that you'd utilize to get the workforce to grow?
So we did a lot of work on this at the Dallas Fed, and there's an economist there, P. Arrhenius, who I think you've met before, who specializes in this. And we've often looked to Canada. And when we've gone up to Washington, D.C., we've talked to elected officials on both sides of the aisle. The Canadian model is more skill-based, more employer-based. What does that mean? They sort of backward integrate into what are the skills we're short of? What are the skills we need? What are the type of workers we need? And that are not going to get filled by our own citizens. They're not. These jobs are going to, and let's figure out if we can curate immigration to try to fill those needs. So there's a model and there's variations of that model. We could do this, but we're not doing it right now. Right now, we're basically more focused on scrubbing the workforce.
Yeah, well, it's almost 180 degrees.
And here's what we the Dallas Fed has found, but it's become my own views. For every job that goes unfilled, and these are attractive jobs, by the way. I mean, they pay over $100,000 a year. Some pay over $200,000 a year. It's hard. We cannot fill them. For every one of those jobs that goes unfilled, there's another quarter or half a job that would have been created that's not created. Right. So it is a headwind for growth. I think you could pursue it in different, but not if you're historically highly leveraged. Debt to GDP right before COVID was in the United States was in the mid 70s. It's now over 100%. I don't need to tell you, interest expense is now larger than the defense budget. And so we're going to have to find ways to bend the curve on this debt. And workforce growth is probably going to have to be a discussion we're going to have in the years ahead.
But it's also a leadership. You talked about this. We're over 100% now. The total debt's over $30 trillion. We're adding trillions each year. The really scary thing is we're spending more on interest now than we are on defense.
Right.
Any type of movement on interest rates start pushing that higher and
it's
higher.
Been a bipartisan effort.
The problem is that's why I'm leaning. It is a bipartisan of silence.
I'm afraid so.
There is absolutely no discussion today at all on that. So it begs a two-part question.
Yeah.
One is, at what point do we have some conversation? And two is, what should the conversation be around? In other words, what would Rob Kaplan like to see to try to address?
So let's take two approaches. One approach, which is you get a bipartisan, and I'll talk about what they might do. You go back to a Simpson-Bowles type bipartisan commission. I don't see any prospect that this is happening, but there are a lot of people advocating for it. Margaret Spellings at the BPC, Bipartisan Policy Center, she's been advocating for it.
She was on a little bit ago and we talked about that. Yeah.
That's right. And so, and basically you get Democrats, Republicans, people, business people, whoever you want, both sides of the aisle, and you agree up front, we're going to vote up or down, and we're going to hold hands and take these unpalatable steps. That's one option. President would have to give up a lot of power to do that, but it might be necessary, and was very effective. Except we never finished it during the last time it happened, Simpson-Bowles.
And in theory, takes the president and Congress off the hook, so to speak.
Well, that's right, but they have to agree up front that they're going to vote up or down. Not that they're going to implement it, but they're going to vote up or down. So that's one approach. Second approach, now let's go through a broader approach. It's going to take 15 things. What's it going to take? You can't just cut. You also need GDP growth. So nominal GDP growth. There's real and then there's nominal GDP growth generates tax revenues. So you got to do things that push both. So what that would include immigration, controlled immigration would help growth. AI adoption, although it's going to create dislocations, which I'm more hopeful that we can manage, that will create more GDP growth. That could be very helpful. And so AI is a real opportunity. It's got some threats, but there's a real opportunity. Then go back to DOGE. You could reintroduce DOGE again, except this time make it a 4-year effort, not a
6 months.
not much, and embed in these. And AI will probably be one of the key tools that you can use to make government more efficient. And then you've got all the other very politically difficult questions about: do you alter the tax system? Do you make it even more progressive? Do you do a number of things to try to generate more revenue?
But at some point, you've got to deal with the entitlement programs.
And then you have to
Social
look
Security, Medicare, Medicaid.
That's right.
That's 2/3 of it.
And then we've talked about means testing, raising the retirement age.
Means testing, raising retirement age, et cetera, those things.
So that commission, if you had it, would have 15 or 20 unpalatable things that they could do, but we could agree on them. The other choice is for an administration to try to do as many of these things as they can if they believe in it, and get agreement on both sides of the aisle, which seems to be harder to do. But one of the two is probably going to have to happen. And when do we need to start? I would say at now $40 trillion of debt heading north, and another approximately, let's call it $75 trillion is the present value of unfunded entitlements. I'd say we're probably past this point. Now, the other thing I would say, Europe has got the same challenge. China's got a very significant challenge. Japan's got similar challenge, although they got worse demographics. Yep. Germany's the one place where
China actually has worse demographics.
They have worse demographics than we do. They do. A lot of the world, we're not alone on the demographic issue or the leverage issue. And so then the other tricky discussion, which is going to be sensitive, in that kind of world, you would think you would want to collaborate more with other countries on things you could do together, so that you could spend somewhat less. And I don't need to tell you that's not the direction we're going either. But all these things would need to be on the table in a discussion.
They need to be. That's addressing the side of the debt where we basically cut spending or cut spending relative to the growth of the economy.
And by the way, I would guess investing in education, early childhood literacy. And by the way, I would call on business people to be part of this, help fund it, skills training, other things. We could do this. And what deleveraging doesn't look like, it doesn't look like this. It looks like you just stop the growth of the deficit and you start to bend it.
Relative to the growth of the economy.
That's right.
Just take the growth of the economy greater than
then you try to have a plan where over 15 or 20 years, you kind of bend it down. We could do it, but the sooner we start, the better we're going to be.
The other two ways of dealing with it, however, now that's and you're pragmatic. You deal with clients all over the world. They love hearing, I'm sure, about the theoretical, but sooner or later they're going to push you back to the pragmatic.
Yep.
That's the one. We've also talked about the difficulty getting to that point. The other two are we can inflate our way out of it.
Which we've just learned. We just went through a little exercise on that. And what did we learn? We learned you could try it, but what you learn is there's, let's call it 85 million workers that make 55 grand a year or less. And when you do that and they are living, you squeeze them.
Absolutely.
And they vote. And I think we're finding it's extremely politically unpopular.
Makes option number one more difficult to implement.
Makes it harder for them.
Yep.
And they are so I don't know that inflating and wear out of it is an attractive option.
And then the only one left is default or renege.
Yeah, which obviously we don't want to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think there's a path where we can work on this, but we're getting to the point where we've got to work on it.
Rob, do you see in your work within Goldman or your observations looking at Washington or other governments across the world that we're moving to that?
We're not. Let's put it this. I think there's some things we're doing that are helping. I actually think more balanced regulation, tough regulation, but more balanced, that will help productivity growth. And so I think you got to be careful at the government level. And I used to be at the Fed. You can get so tilted on regulation that you make yourself feel better that you're tougher, but tougher if it undermines growth. You're better off being more balanced. I think they're actually making that change. I think AI adoption, there's a lot of things we have to manage around it, including the dislocated workers, which I think we can do, but we can talk about that. I think AI has the potential, we think, to add 50 basis points plus to GDP growth in the out years. So that's enormous. And also it should be disinflationary in the out years. It just isn't yet because we've got all these other things going on, including the oil price shock.
So how do we handle the implementation of AI, but also understand that there's a part of the workforce here that maybe is disenfranchised by it?
So let's go through the ledger, because I think this is going to be a multi-year, complicated discussion, and people tend to go to one side or the other. I think it's going to be more, you're going to have many tasks that are going to be automated. Fine. So it means the jobs are going to change and certain jobs will be eliminated. Okay. However, I also believe many new jobs are going to be created. And what we found is when you improve the affordability and the accessibility for certain products and services, demand goes up. So what's an example? I'm on the board of Harvard Medical School, and I'll tell the story. 5 years ago, we used to discuss, the future of radiologists. I don't know, because AI and automation is going to replace them. What did we find? Radiology has become more accessible. Demand for radiologists has spiked. And so I actually think the AI evolution may surprise us. Also, the other thing I'm finding, and you're already seeing this, new business formation, the ability to start and build your new business. You have AI tools now that is facilitating that. So we may have a higher percentage of our workforce as entrepreneurs or running their own business. And so I actually think we can work our way through it, but it's going to take a number of years to do it. But I'm actually more optimistic. I'm cautiously optimistic about how this can turn out.
So I want to push on this one more time. On the state of entrepreneurship, there's no better time, in my view, to start a tech business than today. You've got so many tools to push a product to market immediately.
Or a gardening business, any kind of business.
Totally.
AI is letting you have more muscle right out of the box.
So how do we handle consolidation moving forward of the businesses that, call it are valuable versus all the other long tail of those businesses that don't create the value?
So this is where capitalism comes in that every time we see a layoff announcement, oh my God, people forget we're destroying tens of millions of jobs every year. That's capitalism. But we're creating a little bit greater number of jobs every year. And so it's not that there won't be destruction. It's not an accident that the life cycle of a business in the United States is, you pick it, 25 years, and many of the businesses that were leaders 50 years, you don't even recognize them anymore. They're new names. So that's capitalism. I think this can work. The part that worries me would help if you improved, again, access to childcare for at-risk groups, full day versus half-day pre-K, improve secondary education, improve the percentage of kids in the United States, which is disappointing, that they get to first and third grade reading at grade level. It's possible that more kids will have to go for skill training, not go to college, but maybe colleges increasingly ought to offer a skill option. They're resisting that right now. They're leaving it to high schools and junior colleges. I wonder if you're going to get a 4-year degree, maybe you get a skill and you get a 4-year degree, especially for state. I went to Kansas for state schools. They're not about to do that yet, but I think that conversation, the whole educational ecosystem needs to be improved to adapt to this.
You deal with a lot of major corporations all across the world. Let me take Kyle's point and give you a conversation that I was in, kind of a thesis, and you comment on it. The thesis on AI is that for the first time, this actually gives smaller businesses an advantage because they can move to AI quicker. Larger companies, because of the processes in play to deal with those, it's much more difficult. Yeah. So for the first time, you have a flip where smaller businesses actually now have a competitive advantage, or at least the first time in a long, long time.
Yeah.
That make any sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So there's two ends of this barbell. I think for small businesses, I agree with you. And we're seeing this, by the way. And the data is showing it, that more and more businesses are able to grow and have be able to leverage AI to build their business. That's on the one hand. You've got on the other hand these gigantic hyperscalers that are gathering size and force and are spending enormously on compute, and they're going to disrupt a lot of industries.
Meta, Google, et cetera. Are we talking
and
those
more
folks?
coming.
Okay.
You've got Jeff Bezos announced he's going to do a venture called Prometheus, where I think he's already raised reportedly $38 billion on his way to 100, and they intend
And just sold $5 billion worth of Amazon, in theory, move it over there.
They intend to get into a whole bunch of manufacturing, aerospace, other industries. So what we're seeing at our firm is then there's everybody in between. And the part that's been interesting is it used to be if I had a $10 billion plus company, I'm huge and I'm dominant and I probably felt dominant. Here's what we're seeing today. More and more of those companies are saying, you know what? I need more size and scale, not to compete against these guys, but to compete against these guys who are more likely to get into my business. So what we're seeing is more $10 billion plus mergers, and you're going to see more of those than we've seen in a long time. The other thing you're seeing is, whereas a lot of businesses have been built initially with leverage, or there've been transactions with leverage, I think in a world where disruption is higher, you're going to have to be more careful about being leveraged, because there's a greater risk that there could be an event overnight that lowers your EBITDA 20%. It's not fatal, but you don't want to be highly leveraged when that happens. You want to be able to adapt to it.
Do we end up, though, with small businesses and gigantic businesses and nothing in between?
No, I think we'll wind up with the whole continuum, but I think it'll put a pressure on those in between to make sure that whatever product or service you do is distinctive. And that's always been the question, and it's getting, given AI and all these developments, are we still distinctive? Are we still distinctive? And then Amazon or some other big company makes a move. Oh, brother, are we still distinctive? And that's the question that businesses are asking every day. Are we still distinctive?
One of the questions I'm sure you get all the time is, what do you think about the economy today? Where does it stand? Given the discussion we just had, is that even a relevant conversation now? Or there's so many different pieces to a U.S. economy that there's not an answer. There's an answer to this sector, there's an answer to this part of the economy.
So I'd say yes to both, in that it's very relevant to talk about the whole economy, because it's the whole economy that services the debt of the government. GDP growth, nominal, real plus inflation, that's what pays the bills and allows us to have the social safety net and all the things that we do. Having said all that, there are the workforce now by income level is diverging. We talked about low, moderate income workers versus people that are more affluent, have financial assets, own their home, and their fortunes are diverging a bit. And when I talk to companies, this first group, low, moderate income, is challenged right now. It's not that they're not spending, and they're employed, but they're watching every dollar, and businesses that serve them, they're seeing there's a headwind for their business, and the war has probably made it a greater headwind because gas prices are up. And there's a whole bunch of industry stories that are unique to those industries, but I think the overall economy matters because the health and well-being of a country and whether its population is flourishing is still based on the whole economy. And this is why, for those who think that AI is just going to run wild, or it's going to be a small handful of people that are going to sacrifice human beings at the altar of productivity, I don't think it's going to work out that way. I think still the test on AI and on what we're doing in the economy is going to be, is the population flourishing? And if they're not, yes, you're going to see more regulation, you're going to see more guardrails, you're going to see other actions taken so that the whole country and the population is benefiting. That's the challenge.
Are we flourishing?
I think you're seeing some divergence right now. Again, and the group I'm most worried about is low, moderate income. Many of them who live in at-risk areas. Most of maybe don't have advanced degrees. They're living paycheck to paycheck, and I think that group would tell you, they have an upbeat attitude, but they're telling you that life is challenging.
Well,
Okay.
and we can talk about it from economic, but I also want you to go out from societal standpoint. So put to numbers and what you're talking. Since the pandemic, the top echelon, the top 1%, their spending has increased 62%.
Yeah.
If you look at middle income, that's about 3% per annum, or the group that you were talking about, lower strata of the economy, that's 0.9%. That hasn't even touched inflation.
Right.
So they found themselves going back down.
That's right.
So when we talk about this K-shaped
It's for real.
economy, what does it mean longer term for the nation?
So I would guess, and you're going to see it, I would guess in the years ahead in elections, in responses of government officials to this, and certainly mayors and governors, they're responsible for the whole population. And one of the reasons why this group, affluent group, has done much better is they own financial assets. And there's been just enormous appreciation in financial assets, stocks and everything else. And that's helped buffer or more than offset this inflation issue. And that's why back to inflation. This is why back to the Fed is going to need, in my opinion, if I were there, and when I talk to people there, I don't think they should give up on the 2% inflation target, even though we see, we're challenged by it right now.
Because inflation is a killer for the lower income.
I think you're going to listen. If headline inflation is 2 3/4 to 3, the share of wallet inflation, is for them might be 6, 7, or 8%.
Yeah.
That isn't going to work. And so I think we've got to continue on getting inflation down to 2%, and the Fed is going to need to prove, and I know Kevin Warsh is going to need to be clear that he's taking that. I would think he needs to be very clear that he's taking that very seriously.
Is that going to be the case, though? If you listen to him going into this, he was a great advocate of let's reduce the rates. And again, people would argue that part of what you just said, people with assets did great the last 10 years. But people would argue the reason for that was a Fed policy of basically a zero rate environment, which if you've got assets, that's a terrific environment. If you don't have assets, flat wage growth for 40 years.
So he was in an unusual situation where when he could speak, it was pre-war, okay, by and large. He testified, yes, and then he was more neutral. And so let's put it this way. If I were so presumptuous as to be giving him advice, he's going to need to demonstrate to the public and to the people around the FOMC table and not worry about any other constituencies. He's going to have to demonstrate that he takes getting to 2%. He can't worry about any elected official or outside official, elected or appointed. He's going to have to show that he is hell-bent and serious in an appropriate way to get this inflation down, in my opinion, down to 2%. And it doesn't obviously not going to be possible to do it immediately. I also think, listen, if I were in my old seat in the June meeting, I would do nothing, okay, other than I'd clean up the statement to show that there's a chance we may have to raise. It's not, the next move is not necessarily going to be down, fine. And then I would probably hope and watch if we are able to get the Strait of Hormuz open, get oil prices starting to drift lower again, which we're not there yet, and we've got a multi-month healing process. I'd be inclined to be very patient here. I know a lot of people think the Fed's about to is going to raise rate. I would be reluctant if I were in my old seat to do it. I'd want to let this unfold. I'm not moving for sure. I'm not moving to talk at all about cutting rates, but I'm also not there's a high bar for me to talk about raising, and I'm going to take it one meeting at a time and see how things develop. But I want to give it a chance to develop. And right now we're in this fog where we don't even know. First order business is we have to see when the strait's going to get open, and then it'll help see through the fog, but that hasn't happened yet. And so we're in the height of the fog right now.
Granted, the straits is an issue that's sitting out there, but the jobs report was much stronger than people anticipated. Inflation hit 3.8%, not necessarily the one that you were talking about. But
it's right.
3.8%.
Said in the wrong way.
Both of those would point to starting to deal with an increase in rates, because part of the argument several years ago was the Fed never moved quick enough when they should have, when it was inflation of 8%, et cetera.
So let me comment on what I think. Let's review the history. I don't think the issue was the Fed didn't move quick enough. The Fed moved too quickly, in my opinion, in the fall of 2020. You may have talked with you about this before, to make a commitment, which I didn't think it should make, and I dissented, to keeping rates at zero until we reach full employment. And I thought that was ill-advised, and we should not have had an open-ended view to keep rates at zero and keep buying bonds. So I think the Fed was late. So then when it became clear that commitment was ill-advised and inflation was going up, the Fed was a little bit boxed by its own forward guidance, and I would argue it waited a year too long to begin to stop the bond buying and to start raising rates. Okay, I think it's learned a lot. I can tell you, I think the people around the table have learned a lot from that. And what have they learned? Don't make grand prognostications. It's hard to forecast inflation. Don't be a prognosticator. Be a risk manager. I think that lesson, for better or worse, is embedded in this group around the table right now. And I think they're going to want to make sure they understand what's going on before they move up or down. And I think the truth is, if I were in my former seat, I don't know what's going on because I'm waiting on a huge event, which is the strait opening. If it weren't for the war, it was a possibility, I even thought, that by late this year, you might see headline inflation begin to ease. This has blown that up. But I think when you're not sure what's happening, the only thing I would say is don't do something to make things worse. Now, one thing about the strong jobs report, I'll also make a comment that I'm very aware of. Back to the tax stimulus. We're getting the maximum benefit of the tax stimulus right now.
Yeah.
The question I have is, by later this year, as that begins to fade, what's GDP growth going to look like then? And I would be thinking about that also in my former seat.
Now, one thing that the new chairman has said is he wants to get rid of forward guidance.
Yeah.
This idea of kind of, here's the direction we're looking at.
Yeah.
Good move, bad move.
Yeah. So I think the Fed, on the one hand, what I just described in the fall of 2020, that was forward guidance on steroids, making a current commitment to future action. And I wouldn't have done it. And I think the lesson the Fed, I hope, learned from that is that type of current commitment to future action. Don't do that again. Be more nimble. So then that's the extreme of forward guidance. Then there's the dot plot and Fed speeches where people give their forecast over the next year or two, what they think is going to happen. I think Kevin Warsh's view is we might want to reduce that also, because whether you realize it or not, it may have the effect of boxing you rhetorically, and that you said this and now you're doing the opposite. And so,
because he's a great advocate, the Fed didn't move when they should have in past times.
I agree with him. And I think forward guidance was the reason they didn't. They'd made a firm commitment and
just couldn't back out of it.
And they shouldn't have ever made the commitment. And if they did make the commitment, they should have backed out of it because the world changed. Don't make that mistake again. So I'm sympathetic to what he's saying. The question is, how far does it go? Does it mean no dot plot? Do you still have a press conference after every meeting? Do you allow Fed presidents and other officials to give speeches still? And I think that part, I'm not sure exactly where he's going to want to draw the line, but that's what he's going to have to figure out.
Now, the rates are one piece of it. The other side of it is the balance sheet.
Yeah.
The balance sheet at the Fed has ballooned, I'll use that word, to $6.7 trillion with a T.
Mm-hmm.
He has been very critical of that.
Yeah.
And even to the point of saying that needs to be unwound.
Yeah.
Well, unwinding that has a different implication than you're talking about.
So let's talk about two other roles of the Fed. One is bank regulation, which is inextricably linked with the balance sheet, and then there's a balance sheet. So let's start the easy part. On bank regulation, that is not politically independent, and it hasn't been for a long time. Meaning when the new administration gets in, the Fed has tended to change its regulatory focus based on what the desires of that administration.
Right. And this administration has pushed down capital requirements on banks.
Yes, and I actually think the moves that Mickey Bowman and is working on, I think will be tough, but more balanced and more tailoring for small banks. So I think you'll see Kevin Warsh unabashedly being a strong partner to Mickey Bowman on making those changes, a big management job. And they've got still a fair amount of way to go, particularly in the tailoring to small banks. So I think that's constructive. One of the things that they'll do in changing the supplementary leverage ratio and other ratios, it will allow the banks to hold fewer reserves. And what do I mean by that? Right now, they have to hold reserves versus treasuries. I think they are making changes that will allow the banks to hold treasuries, get credit for the fact they can borrow against the treasuries, and hold fewer reserves. So in that part, if the banks don't need to hold as much reserves, they have an abundant reserves regime, I think that'll give them a little room to cut the balance sheet a little bit more. But I'll tell you what I don't think Kevin Warsh is going to do. First of all, he is going to partner with Scott Bessent, and I think you'll see the Treasury, and I think this is a good thing, by the way, much more involved in balance sheet management. I think what they're going to be very careful about, this little episode we've just had since the war started where the yield curves moved up, is I would be watching it, and I am watching it very carefully because it puts a strain on business. It puts a strain on the government. And I don't think they're going to be ideological about this. So one thing is if you just knew nothing, we're going to reduce the balance sheet. That ought to push up the curve. I don't think they want to do anything, and nor would I suggest they do anything that pushes the curve up. So I think they're going to be methodical.
So he's going to have to put that desire in abeyance.
Well, I think he'll work in partnership with Scott Bessent. I actually think the staff at the Treasury is a little better equipped. The Fed financial market expertise is more on the overnight and short end of the curve and the plumbing. I think the Treasury has more expertise on the financial market expertise. So I think they'll probably do a deep dive together. But I think they'll be very careful about not doing anything that further pushes up the long end of the curve. Now, some people think they ought to do something like that, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. They're going to have to really think that one through.
I want to take us to the Middle East. I want to talk about the perceived, call it, energy reset that's gone on the last 4 to 5 months. Talk us through the Strait of Hormuz, the importance of it obviously reopening, but what that means for American oil production and what it means for inflation, and also what it means for the Middle East with the Gulf states and obviously Iran being a huge producer for the rest of the world.
So the most important thing for your listeners to know is the oil market's a global market. So a lot of people have asked me, I don't get why it really matters because I thought we were energy self-sufficient here. Well, the oil market prices off. Yeah. And the other thing we've learned is there are a lot of derivatives, helium, fertilizer, other things. And what in a global market, if let's use rough numbers, if total supply demand is, let's call it 105 billion, okay, or million barrels a day, 105 million barrels a day, and you constrain 10 or 15% of it, like any other market, that's an enormous impact. And so that's what's happened. Now, you saw a spike in the price. You see governments have tried to, release reserves and pre-stock to the extent they can, but we're starting to eat into that. And so what you're going to see is, let's assume the Strait gets open, I'm making this up, in 2 weeks. It will take months. First of all, you have facilities to repair, production facilities that have been damaged, and then you'll have to get resupplied where you start building up inventories again. So it won't that the price won't necessarily plummet, but I think the forward curve on oil is still I think it's in the low 70s, let's say. So you'll see it start drift lower.
And it's at 105 now, 102?
Or it depends. Today it got into the 90s on WTI because of the rumors about a settlement. But it's going to take months. Now, the financial markets will look right through it, which is what they do. The problem is if I'm a human being and I'm a low moderate income worker that has to fill up my car every week, I may not see relief at the pump for several months. Okay, so then there's a second thing that's going to happen, and we're already you're going to have I make this up again, 100 billion plus of capex over the next, you pick it, 7 to 10 years, maybe faster. That's going to go into pipelines and all sorts of other infrastructure, scarred by this experience to say we need to diversify around this choke point. And pipeline projects and infrastructure projects that 6 months ago say, doesn't make any sense. Now it makes sense after this experience.
Sure.
So my guess is 10 years from now, if I had to guess, wouldn't shock me if the oil price was closer to 60 than to 100. I don't know where it's going to be in between, but in the short run, it's going to be sticky. And if the strait stays closed longer, you could see oil prices move up more because we're eating into the excess inventory.
Okay, so one other thing you said there was that the markets are going to look right through it. So for the everyday listener of this podcast.
And by the way, drillers are already looking through it, which is why rig count has not picked up as much as you might have thought.
Sure. Explain to us why there's all these bad things, quote unquote, bad things going on in the world. And then all of a sudden the markets are, at 50,000, the NASDAQ's here and it's there and all those things.
That's a great question.
Record level.
Yeah, all the record levels.
So oil's up, rates are up.
Right.
The textbook should say, so there's one other thing.
And we're at war.
And we're at war. There's one other thing going on, which I have not seen in a long time, which is you have a structural AI productivity boom. All right. And how's it manifesting itself? The revisions since the war started, what have S&P revisions done? North, not south. Now it's more concentrated in a smaller number of names. I would guess, and I don't know how long this is going to go on, for the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to see healthy double-digit earnings growth in the S&P. Okay, even if GDP growth is middling. Okay, but we're already seeing it. There is a surge in earnings estimates to the point where, depending on how you do the numbers, and I wouldn't take this too literally, the PE of the stock market with the revisions actually is probably not higher, maybe a little lower than it was before this started, which is kind of hard to comprehend, but the earnings revisions have been that strong. And so we're in a secular move up for earnings. That's great if you have financial assets. The issue, again, back to where we started, is if you're a low moderate income worker and you're reading about this in the newspaper and you're watching this, you're saying, well, that's great for them, but I'm suffocating. And so the rich have gotten richer and I'm suffocating. And so this is going to be, and we've got a midterm election coming up. This is going to be.
So when does it break? Does it break?
You may see it manifest. It's not going to. What you're going to see is low moderate income workers are going to voice their views. Now, between now and the midterm election, you have a chance, which is why they're speeding to get this strait open. Is you want to get this burden on them lower. And so people are saying, gee, the administration may not be taking seriously affordability. I think they're taking it very seriously, which is why they're speeding to try to get this strait open. And they're very aware of it because this is a sizable group and they do vote.
Does it worry you, though, that we initiated a war to prevent a very difficult regime to have nuclear weapons and pose a threat in the future, not only to ourselves, but the rest of the world, and the fact that we might make a deal to open the straits, but never deal with that long-term issue and end up in the same situation we are with North Korea today, but in a much more dangerous part of the world?
So I was going to say, I'm going to stay away from the politics of this. And you may say, but that wasn't a political question. Well, it's impossible. So I'm going to give this in an apolitical way, which is appropriate for me in the seat I sit in. I'm hopeful. I don't believe everything I read in the newspaper and all the narratives, but I'm hopeful. I think this administration is mindful of everything you just said. And is there going to be enormous criticism from? Of course, but I would guess they are very focused on getting the Strait open, at putting this regime in a constrained situation where we're continuing to closely monitor it. And I would guess before this is over, but this could take a year and a half or 2 years before you know the answer. The nuclear discussion, I do know from talking to people in the government, is enormously technical. It's not the kind of thing you do over 3 to 5 days. It's the kind of thing you do over 2 years with very technical people. Would I guess they're going to try to act in a way that constrains the ability of Iran to enrich and and more importantly, have a nuclear? I'm pretty confident they will. However, you'll know the answer to that a year and a half, 2 years from now, because it's going to take that long to work this out.
It's said history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And I think back in the 90s of the way, to be truthful with you, the United States got played by North Korea of delay until the point that they had nuclear weapons. And then there was never a discussion after that point. You couldn't have a discussion after that point. My hope, and I can say it, is that we don't get into that position.
Yeah.
You talked about Goldman.
By the way, I'd say one other comment, and I'll give this comment from where I'm sitting. The narrative that despite this pounding for 2 or 3 months, Iran hasn't really lost that much strength, I don't believe that. No, I think this has been devastating for them in ways that I don't even think we sitting here in a nice air-conditioned office can even understand. And so I would think the truth is somewhere more in the middle. So I'm a little more optimistic.
Okay. 2 things before we'll let you go. One, talk a little bit about your view of the local economy. Has that changed over the last years? Continue to be optimistic next 5 or 10 years?
So I'm very optimistic about Dallas, metropolitan Dallas, and the state of Texas. And I'm confident that we're going to be a magnet for people and firms, and it's going to go on for years. So let's say when I first met you, I think we were talking about the fact that 15 years ago, population of Texas was low, 22-ish, 23-ish. We're now pushing up 30. My guess is, based on all the estimates I've seen, we could be pushing 40. And people go, oh, yeah, that is unbelievable. Right. That is unbelievable relative. Almost every state in the country would trade that hand any day of the week. We are going to continue to, I would think, be pro-business, welcoming. And so I'm very optimistic about that. Narrowly in the city of Dallas, we have a lot of challenges that I'm confident we can solve. We've got the capital, we've got the leadership, and probably, and you and I have been part of these discussions. Figuring out some solutions for South Dallas is probably a key part of that. But I'm optimistic. And all I'm seeing is the strength of business leadership here growing, the community mindset improving. And so I think if I had a hand to play in the United States, I'll take metropolitan Dallas or Texas any day of the week is just a fantastic hand to play. It doesn't mean we're going to do this right. It's going to involve, by the way, better continuing to pound away on early childhood literacy, at-risk populations, helping kids in poverty. But we can do all that. We've got all the resources and the leadership to do it. Many states don't.
Right. You mentioned, and we've talked a lot about the gerrymandering and what's happened in Texas last year or so. California did, Virginia got thrown out, that sort of thing. The amazing statistic to me is if you straight line where we are just to 2030 and look at the new census is 2030, Texas gets 4 to 5 more seats in the House.
Yeah.
That's how much.
Because of population.
To your point of the 40 million and the impact it has.
Yeah.
That's an enormous shift.
That's a lot.
That's a big shift. So Give us a view. Goldman is a key player, not only in the world now, but as we talked about, in the Dallas community.
Yeah.
It's going to be a major employer. Hopefully more and more will come here.
Yeah.
What does Goldman look like in the next 5 or 10 years? Just give us kind of the snapshot of how the firm itself changed. You talked about domestic, now international, the way it's pushed into so many different elements of finance, all types of finance.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be a global firm, continue to build a global footprint in Asia, Europe, Latin America, United States for sure. That's one. The breadth of what we do in serving corporate clients, serving public market or market participants, serving asset management clients, whether it's big institutions, wealthy individuals. We'll continue to build that out. I would guess we'll have more and more and more things that we're able to do. My guess is we'll do it more efficiently because of technology, but we'll still have a very robust population. We'll have waves of new classes. And 20 years from now, I'm not going to be part of running the firm, but there'll be people that we're hiring in the next few years that will be part of it. And the most other important thing, we want to be a leading citizen in the communities that we serve. We want to take ownership of externalities, and that includes in the city of Dallas, in the state of Texas. And I think part of as a business person in the next 20 years, your license to practice is going to be, are you having a positive impact on clients, on communities, and a positive force in the world? And I think we're very mindful of that. And I'm optimistic we will find new and better ways to continue to do that.
Well, great comments to close. This community is fortunate to have Goldman make such a large commitment. I hope we blow by that 5,500. But Rob,
we're running out of space.
We can always build more.
Yeah.
But I'd say even more than that, Rob, and I've had a chance to interact and work with you over the course of nearly a decade now, not quite, but nearly a decade. This community is so much better for you for the fact that you've made it home and you've made contributions.
You're
a combination of those two.
And for you too, for both of you also.
That makes a big difference for this community. Rob, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for watching today's episode. Again, today's episode is sponsored by Clay Cooley Automotive, a family-owned, family-operated automotive company serving the local DFW Metroplex for over 22 years.